All right, so we're gonna give this a shot. This is a new camera angle, and ironically enough, I built the I built the camera mount before I built this, which is my adjustable torch bracket. And let's see here. So, and what happened is this is where my torch was originally mounted. So it's shifted over. I'm not moving everything around, and my camera mount doesn't rotate this way. Sorry, that's just, I didn't get that far, and I'm not gonna do that. I'll just reframe it when I'm in editing. Okay, so what are we gonna do today? Today is $5 bead day. What are $5 beads? Well, not for nothing. They're $5 beads. When I make Christmas ornaments, I end up with a tremendous amount of scrap. Like this. So what I do with it, yeah, there we go. Just checking my shot here. So what I do with it is I put it all in this little bin here, this little tray. It's an old dog food tray, old dog food bowl. And I save it all up. I hoard it all up. Of course, I'm a hoarder. Also, colored glass is incredibly expensive. It's more expensive than prime rib. It's about glass. The price of glass, colored glass, can range anywhere from $20 or $25 a pound for cobalt blue to $100 and some a pound for like crazy stuff. So I save every single tiny scrap of glass. I save colored glass. Clear glass, I'm not too anal about clear glass, but colored glass gets saved. Believe it or not, this little tray full of white here is probably worth about $15, $20. So we save that. We save everything. Because I learned a long time ago at craft shows and art shows and shows that people will buy the weirdest shit. And that's good. We like it when they buy weird things. So for this project, I'm using my GTT Phantom. So you saw me light it. I lit propane, oxygen, propane. So propane, oxygen, and then oxygen. So this center gas has to be cracked just a little bit all the time, which really has a huge impact on the flame. But I kind of have to run it that way. And then sometimes I'll crack this back one a little. Now you have to excuse all the background noise. I've got a fan running in front of me. My oxygen concentrator is running with the compressor. That's the junk, the junk, the junk, the junk. Eventually you just you don't even hear it anymore. How often does the train go by? So often you never even notice it. So to start out, a $5 bead. This morning I took all my little scraps of clear glass. These are 8mm rods that are too short for a whole lot of anything. They're too short to act as regular handles. And so I join them all together. Now, I'm getting better at making them straight, but they're really not as straight as they should probably be. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a gather of glass here. Put that there. Then we're going to build up a gather of glass. The boring part. Now, this part can also get out of hand real quick if you're not paying attention. I'm not using a rest because I don't need to right now. My rests may come into play, usually not with $5 beads because I really don't care what they look like. I know that's a terrible way to be, but it's the truth. I really just don't put a whole lot of effort into them because they're $5 beads. To recoup any money out of $5 beads, I have to make them in less than 10 minutes. 15 max. If I spend anything more than 15 minutes on a bead, it becomes a $7.50 bead, thanks to 30% inflation. Also, that inflation has seriously impacted my glass prices. Clear glass has gone up exponentially in price. Everything's gone up 30% minimum. That's why I built my oxygen concentrator setup. So I got a pretty decent, I have a fairly decent gather here. I'm going to give it a little bit more. I don't think it shows up on camera. I'm actually, I don't want to say gimbaling, but that's basically what I'm doing, is I'm moving my wrist up and down to keep this thing relatively concentric to the rod. So I'm going to take it out. I'm going to let it even out a little bit. Let's see here. You know what? We're going to just grab this hunk that's right here. We're going to heat it up. And we're just going to jam it right into this molten blob of glass here. Just like that. Gonna melt that end off. Now I have to redo my gather because when I push the hot glass in, when I push the cold glass into the hot glass, I pushed it out around. I'm gonna finish this end up here. Little paddle, push it in like that. I could marver this a little bit. I'm going to, but I want to get a little bit bigger gather going. I don't want it to even out. When I push the glass in like that, it really pushes it out of balance. So I'm doing a lot of, I should probably have an elbow camera to show how much I'm actually moving my arm here to try to get this thing to be straight again. So give it a little bit of a marver to try to straighten it. Looks like it worked pretty well. These, like I said, this has to be this particular part of my, I hate to say work, but these absolutely cannot take very long to do. It's just the nature of the beast. So I'm going to let gravity do its thing here. And I'm going to get a nice little drop going. So I have kind of a teardrop or a water drop look to it. Now this thing's still moving. If I stop it for a second in the camera, it starts to droop down. So let's take another rod here. Now I have this. It's an 8mm rod that I pulled into a little bit of a punt, like a smaller punt rod. I am running out of smaller diameter rod. So things that I would normally use 3mm rod for, or 4 or 5mm rod, I have to I have to be more judicious with my waste. I can't be wasting a whole lot of the smaller rod right now, just because I'm using scrap. Sometimes I won't use scrap to make the bail on these, but a lot of times I will. So we're just going to pull that out until it's relatively even. For the sake of the video, I'm going to put this up here. Great way to poke my eye out. I'm going to heat this up. Get it not liquid, but not honey, but not stiff. I want a little bit of stiffness to it. I'm just going to pull it out a little more. I'm going to wrap it around that. Yes, my rod, or my clean that up. I have to be really careful with this thing. It's literally inches away from my face. And yes, for all of my people who love to see me hurt myself, I have poked myself in the face with a white hot graphite rod. Alright, so I'm doing the arm gimbal again. Let that cool for a second. I'm going to stick it on the mark. It's still too wet. This actually needs to come off of here. And give it a little tug. Everybody likes a little tug. What that does is it makes the hole a little bit more round. Now I'm just going to melt. I'm going to crank my torch down just a little bit. I want this to be just a little bit more fluidy into where it needs to be fluidy. Yeah, a little bit of that. Yeah, this is a terrible one, but I cannot reiterate enough. These are scrap. They would have been thrown. All this material would have gotten thrown away. No, I don't like this one at all. I'm gonna fix this one. I do have a piece of 6mm rod sitting right here. This helps. It's hard to explain, but the size of the rod that you use to pull, in this particular case, the bail, kind of helps determine the final thickness of the bail. The other thing I might do with this one in particular is not, yeah, that's the way that one's going. I'm going to leave that upside down for a second. Yeah, that works. And just pull that off. Melt that in. The hot glass will flow to the cold glass. Do that just a little bit. Get that just a little bit rounder. Make the bail just a little bit bigger. I'm going to heat up my forceps here. I'm going to use, I don't know what you call this thing, the V fling, the V thingy-majigger here. I'm going to cool that joint. Break it off. There's a razor sharp, well, glass sharp thing at the bottom of that where I broke the puntney off. I melt that in, and there you go. That there is a $5 bead. If I sell these retail at my retail establishment, these are $7.50. Pop that into the kiln and away we go. Now, I'm going to do another one just to show a different way of doing it, but that's what I'm going to be doing pretty much. That's what I'm going to be doing until this container is empty. Not necessarily those mushroom beads. I'm not a huge fan of those. It's just not something that I really. They sell, but it's just not something that I'm crazy about. Alright, so I just reached into my little trash bin here and pulled out a piece of glass, a stringer that I had made for a different project that just broke. You can see it's pretty big actually. Now this is probably going to crack and break before I get it melded in like that. It's okay. That's why that stringer got thrown in that bin, because it's really shitty and brittle and just wasn't a good stringer. But that's okay. That's why I have that bin there. You can't make perfect every time. So I just stuck it on there in any willy-nilly manner. We're gonna just bend it around a little. This one I'll do a little differently because that's just the way it worked out. Hey, wow, that's really hot. Oh, so much for that. I'm gonna grab another. So I have all these 8mm rods, and you can see there's a joint in them right here, which is fine for $5 beads. If I'm doing something important where I need an absolutely 100% concentric piece, I will I'll use a fresh piece of rod, and I've got a bunch of it, so I'm not really worried about it. I'm going to crack my outside oxygen here just a little to bring that flame in. It brings the candles down. Sadly, I cannot figure out how to adjust the exposure on my GoPro to get a good shot of the candles, and I'm not mounting my $6,000 camera over top of my torch. Not on that janky ass thing that I built. Okay, so now we got this thing nice and hot. I'm gonna turn the torch down just a little bit. I'm just gonna turn that torch down a little. Get this thing just a little bit more hot. I'm gonna take it flat. I have another piece of graphite right here. I'm just gonna flatten it out. Good enough. Now what I've done here is I've created a lens in the front of this piece. And I'm just very carefully, or actually very sloppily, creating kind of a little bit of a round back to it, but not totally round. I actually want the back to be somewhat flat, and do that this way. Perfect. Now I'm going to switch this around. That is not going to be there. That is not going to be there. There's another one. It's got a joint in it. Oh, there's this one. I'm just going to stick this on the back, kind of wet, not super wet, but kind of wet. So this is now the front. I'm going to melt this off right at where the joint was. It's going to kind of heat the whole thing up. And I'm pushing, well, I'm not, the gravity is pushing the rod in. I have to be careful because I am rushing, because I have to. These are the amount of money I make on these is just not really. It's almost not even worth making them. I'm trying to recoup some of some of my glass cost, and that's purely what I'm doing here. Now, this is going to be a lens on the front. Every once in a while, I'm going to take it out. I have to take it out because it gets too wet. It gets because my torch is pretty hot right now, and the glass is flowing. If I stop, which I'm not going to, the lens would actually melt down and pretty much fall off. Well, it wouldn't fall off. It would create like a big kind of blob. Now I'm going to just inspect this here. Yeah, you know what? That's about as good as that's going to get. I am one. I have my marble mold here, and I'm just going to press it straight down into the marble mold, flat like that. What this does is it flattens the bead out. It makes it a little bit bigger. It makes it a little bit more appealing in size. I like this size. It's about 1 inch in diameter, which to me is the perfect size. I am not a bead artist at all. That's not my thing. It's not what I do. I don't do the beads. I don't do the jewelry. All I do is make the beads. I'm going to put a pretty hot, pretty wet joint right here. Just like that. I'm going to let that hang. Let gravity do its thing till it cools off. I'm going to flip that back up. I'm going to shock it. Snap it off. Wet the back. I'm going to take this piece of 3 mil, which I quite frankly wish was 4 mil. Gravity is your friend, gravity is your enemy. Always. Now, just because I can, I'm going to heat this thing up a little bit. That's part of why I put this nice wet joint here, up here. And I'm going to just let it hang for a second. Sorry, the camera angle is not showing exactly how it's hanging. So basically what's happening is the gravity is pulling the bead down into more of a teardrop shape as opposed to a round shape, you know. I have this piece of 3 mil here. I'm going to get it pretty hot because if I don't, alright, good enough. So now I'm going to take and I'm going to wet that joint back in pretty good. There's a bit of a, I don't know what it is, kind of a nasty spot right there. Now it kind of screws me up a little. Let that cool a little. I'm going to heat this 8 mil up here. I want my final loop size to be the size that it is on the left side of that, so I'm just going to pull it out a little more. So I have that. It's very difficult to do that, so I'm going to just go back like this again. Sorry for the bad angle. Now I have a nice loop. I have a nice amount of material here to make a loop out of. I'm just going to heat the top here where it's a little thick. And I'm going to create a loop. Alright, just like that. Didn't work out all that great. I may have to redo that one. Yep, that already screwed up. So this was a little thin. Bugger. It's okay. That was a little thin, so we're just going to heat this back up, being careful to try to keep as many air bubbles out of it as I can. Yes, I admit that they are $5 beads and I really don't care, but I also don't want them to break. Air bubbles are bad. We don't want air bubbles. There we go. It's nice and wet. Now, go like that. I usually get it on the second try. So if you can see here, I have a nice little thin spot. Pull that off. I'm going to check it. It's crooked. This is a graphite rod. Inanimate graphite rod, which is the employee of the week here. Okay. I'm going to melt this in a little. Just like that. I'm going to heat the whole loop up. And then I'm going to stick the rod in. Check it for straightness. Straight enough for a $5 bead. My joint here is nice and wet. It is what it is. You have to make sure, I have to make sure that I heat up my forceps here relatively hot, so I don't shock the glass. I shocked a piece yesterday. It kind of bummed me out a little bit because it was a nice shock glass. I shocked it snapped it. Or it didn't snap, it just put a little tiny crack in it. I threw it back in the kiln. Oh, that's another thing. I don't know if it'll show up on camera, but I have to wait until it's no longer red at the bottom before I stick it in the kiln. If I stick it in the kiln while it's red, it will stick to the kiln. It'll stick to the fiberglass I have in the bottom of the kiln. Boink, into the kiln it goes. Let's make another one. And I will do this, sadly, sadly I'm gonna have to do this all day. Now I got this extra hunk here, so, cigarette ashes. We're gonna join these two together. When I'm making $5 beads, the whole idea of $5 beads is to get rid of scrap. So I will basically, I will use every single piece of glass I have on the table here to make this happen. Just get a nice wet joint there. Pull it out of the flame. Just keep rotating it. Sometimes I'll do this. I'll stick it on the marber plate. I don't care too much if it's not a nice joint. There's a vitrification right here where I made it. I know it's not going to show up on camera, but trust me, there's vitrification there. Doesn't matter. It just matters that it's relatively straight. I'll stick it down here on the deck and just give it a little roll. Good enough. Now, back to where we were. And like I said, this will go on all day. It's sad, but I just have to do it. And well, it's not really sad. It's just a matter of this is what I have to do. All right, so I'm gonna turn that off. One of the problems with rushing this, doing it this fast and rushing, is I get a lot of schmutz in the glass. I boil the glass often, which creates air bubbles. I should probably toss this, but I'm not going to because scrap. I'm going to grab another hunk of this thing. Just jam it in there. And then I'm just going to roll it a little to make sure it sticks. I'm going to heat this up out here. I don't know if it shows up on camera. Yeah, just barely. I'm going to throw a little extra in there. Just give it a little bit more heat. Just to widen it out a little bit. It's a heavy reduction flame, but it doesn't matter because this is the color that I made these pieces out of. This stringer is not a striking color. These are what you see is what you get. So I don't have to really worry too much about flame chemistry, but I definitely don't want it too hot because I don't want to boil it. The what you see, what you get colors do have a tendency to boil if you're not careful with them, especially the chromes and the crayon colors. Luckily, these are just crayon colors, so not too big of a deal. I also, this particular, these particular colors, this particular stringer, I made it out of relatively stable color. The reason it broke, this is when I encased it. When I encased it, I trapped a lot of air in it when I encased it. So that's what actually ruined this piece. Now, we have a nice little teardrop shape here. You can see it's a nice little teardrop shape. I have these, used to be parallel bead mashers. They are not parallel. I don't have a regular graphite masher, but I do have these. And I'm going to jam that in there. I'm going to squeeze this down, just like that. You can see they're not parallel, and I'm just too lazy to fix them. I don't use them very often. Now, when I do that, I end up with a considerable amount of vitrification on the outside. Vitrification means means I smoke too much. Basically what it is it's just wiggly lines, for the sake of argument. They're hot spots, cold spots. When you smush it out, it's like water, ripples in water. Glass is very much like water. Okay, so now I got rid of the vitrification. I basically flame polished it out, at least enough of it for what I'm doing. I'm gonna kind of straighten this a little bit. That's the bead. I'm gonna grab this good old piece of 3mm that's just sitting on my bench here. Heat it up. Jam it onto the bottom. Heat up to 8mm, and I'm going to create a bail. One of the tricks to this is knowing exactly how hot you need to get it so that it doesn't melt, but also doesn't screw you up. I don't know how else to put it. You don't want it to melt in the wrong spot. That's the whole part of glass blowing. Okay, so there we go, $5 bead. That's a good one. Nice size bail. Nice size hole so that you can put pretty much anything through it. I prefer to make the bails a little bit smaller, but I was told by a bead maker to make the bails bigger. Like I said, $5 beads. I'm not wasting too much time on them. Take that nice little razor sharp piece off. And like I said, these, I don't care. These are literally scrap. If I get $5 for it, I get $5 for it. If you buy a whole shitload of them, I might give you a discount on a whole bunch of them. I don't care. Boom, $5 bead. Now, let's see, what else do we got cooking here? Oh, I'm just going to use this same piece and this piece. We're going to join these two together. And I will do this pretty much until my wife tells me that we're going to Acme and go buy food. Or in this particular case, it's going to be till the battery runs out on that GoPro. Don't you worry, the fishing rod tube project is also in the can. We're waiting on that to finish. That's a little too crooked. That'll work though. Doesn't need to be perfectly straight. It just needs to be less crooked. That makes any sense. Alright, so I'm going to set that one aside so it cools, because I got a nasty habit of picking up hot glass off my bench. Once you get a gather like this going, you can turn off there, because that'll get too fast on you. It'll start moving too fast. What we got here? Oh, nice piece of. This is an exotic color. again, it's just something that was sitting on the bench. If I was feeling very drifty, which I'm not, I'd actually, I might even use my Carlisle torch to do this with, which is this torch here. The Carlisle uses significantly less oxygen than the GTT, but it's not really that big of a deal one way or the other. Because this is an exotic, running it in a real heavy reduction flame like I'm doing can create some pretty cool effects, some pretty cool colors. It gives it like a metallic look to it. I'm just going to heat these up. I'm going to mash this one also. But I think what I might do is I'm going to mash it. And then twist it. But I got to get it kind of round first. If you leave any of these lumps in it, if you leave any of those lumps in it, when you mash it, the lumps come out kind of icky. So I have to make it somewhat round-ish before I do it. It's pretty significant. It exponentially gets more. So you know what? I might not mash this one. We're gonna do something different. Actually looks kind of cool. Alright, so we're going to mash this one on the marver here. We're going to do this one just like we did the first one. I'm going to kind of even it out a little. This is just to give it a little bit of shape to the back. Kind of a... I am pushing kind of hard, which can have some detrimental effect, but not always. Heat up this rod here. I want to get this side nice and hot. I'm going to make this a double-sided bead. So I want the bail will be, hopefully the bail will kind of be in the middle, so it can be worn inside or outside. Like it can be worn in either orientation. Alright, so I get that like that. I'll let that cool off for a second. Gonna heat this up. Doing it this way will create an air pocket, but I'm not worried about it. So there's going to be an air line probably right there where that joint is, unless I get this really hot, but chances are it's going to have an air line. I'm not worried about it. Again, $5 bead. If it makes it out of the kiln and it survives getting tossed into the $5 bead bin, then if it breaks later, I can only do so much. It's not a lack of pride. It's just a lack of. It's just an expediency. I have to do it this way. If I waste too much time on these, then they're just like I cannot reiterate enough. Then it's just not worth it to me. I'm gonna give it a little bit of that. why they're $5 and not $25 or $30 or $40 a piece. Alright, so flame polish that out. Take a quick look at it. Yep, that came out pretty much exactly how I had intended. We're going to go back. We're going to go to the front of it. Got to be careful because it is really goopy. When dealing, when doing $5 beads, I'm really oftentimes pushing the limit of my abilities to keep wet glass from slumping, unintentionally slumping. So I'm gonna, the side that the punt is on is actually is nice and hard at this point, or hard enough. Hopefully I'm just going to give it a little mold here. Going to heat this, so there's a line here now that has to get heated out. Now I'm going to just tighten the torch up just a tiny bit. Basically what I'm trying to do is make, it's called a lentil shape. I'm kind of fond of that for my beads. It's a nice shape. It's okay. Actually, it's more like a Mentos, not necessarily a lentil. More like a Mentos. Alright, now on the back side here, this is kind of the game, you got to flip them back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I have to polish this out, but you notice I'm using a much smaller rod this time. I'm just going to get a cold joint, and I'm going to melt this off. I'm going to flame cut it. Take that little booger out of there. Now, I do say that these are all $5 beads, right? Well, once this is out of the kiln, and I look at it and say, well, that turned out pretty nice. It might be a $7.50 bead. You never know. All right, so I'm going to give this thing a little spin. Every time you spin it, the centrifugal force is smoothing it out, or sometimes it's not smoothing it out and making it worse. So I have this, the very, very end of my, I think this is 6mm rod, which makes perfect bails for this. As a matter of fact, you know what? I like this one so much, I may make this independent bail. So we're going to set this in the kiln for a second. And we're going to grab a piece of long enough 3mm. Point that on the end of there. Because this rod is so short, the one in my right hand is so short, I have to, I gotta play games a little bit with it. I'm gonna stick my eye poker back up here. I'm gonna grab another piece of 3mm, keep handy because I'm gonna need it. I'm gonna heat this up, trying very carefully not to smash my eye out or poke my eye out. I'm heating this rod pretty evenly as I can. I want it to be like wet spaghetti. And I'm going to take it up here. I'm going to stick it on that form, let it cool for a second. Stick it back down on the form, make sure it's relatively square. I'm going to melt off this section. Trying not to do that. Because I'm so short on this material, I'm doing some things that I normally wouldn't do. Normally I'd have just pulled that off and tossed it aside. But that back in heat real quick. And so that just finishes the end off, so there's not like a real big ass bugger on there. Okay, now I'm going to take this 3mm rod. poker's going to go. And I'm going to stick it kind of as close to the axis as I can. Melt that way, like that. Now I'm going to heat this up. And I'm going to pull some of this off of here, just using this rod that I have in my hand. Not very thrifty of me to do it that way. I could have used a pair of tweezers. Now, we made a bail. And I'm going to kind of flatten it a little bit on the marver here. And I want to stick the bail in the kiln real quick. I'm not actually sticking it in the kiln as much as I am just sitting it on the edge. It's called garaging. Alright, now I'm going to take this piece of 3mm. I'm going to find what I think is a nice position. Like that. And I'm going to put a relatively wet joint here. Because if I don't do a nice wet joint, when I go to do this, that one can break off, which is really kind of sucky when that happens. I'm going to just melt the punt in. I'm not even going to try to take it off. There's a little tiny nipple of the remaining punt on here, which I have to melt in, and that just gets melted in like this. I'm just heating it, I'm holding it flat, I'm heating it, holding it flat, and what that'll do is it'll just meld in and it'll look just fine. Now, I can get this out of here without breaking it. Okay, there we go. Now, this is kind of tricky. So, I'm going to get this nice and hot. The base rod, or the base marble, or the base bead has to get really hot. The bail, not so much, because I'm pretty happy with the shape of the bail. And then I'm just going to go wink, and I'm going to let gravity make it look like it belongs there. Pull it out, give it a little tug. I'm pretty happy with that. Now, I'm going to snap that off like that. It just popped right off. I knew that was going to happen. I'm going to melt that little nipple in really carefully because it can go south pretty much almost instantly. Now you can see here that the bail is relatively straight with the piece. There's no front or back to it. The bails are a little large, I do know that, but quite frankly I haven't figured out how to make them any smaller. I'm going to shock that, snap that off. I'm actually going to break this off just right here on the table. I'm just going to whack it on the table, blow that off, make sure there's no little tiny shards of glass that have flown into and stuck to it. Hot glass, we'll stick the hot glass. Okay, that's it. I'm not overly concerned. There's a little bit of a nipple on the bottom where the punt rod was. That's not really too big of a concern for me. I'm going to let it cool for a second or two. I'm going to throw that in the heat a little bit to make sure it doesn't shock. The forceps act like a heat sink. Let it cool for another second or two. Into the kiln it goes. And like I said, I'm going to repeat this process all day long until this bowl of scrap has gotten down to a size where it doesn't bother me anymore.